Welcome to Bible/Chat. Jason, how are you?
Good.
Good.
How are you?
Same as I was exactly a minute and a half ago.
Yep.
Isn't that funny how this works?
Mm-hmm.
We record them in mass.
We try.
What can we do? Okay, so,
Baptism.
yeah, last time we talked about baptism. You give us a good biblical defense of baptism, why we do it,
Yeah.
where in the scripture we're supposed to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have any necessarily specific rules.
Right, not a
for
lot
it.
of rules for it.
Yeah.
So then the next question after that, we talked about believers getting baptized.
Yeah.
Maybe quickly, what's the mode of baptism? Does it matter? And then what about, like, circumstances surrounding your baptism?
Yeah.
Like infant baptism, baptized in another church.
Yeah.
Church with quotes,
Yeah.
like you were baptized in another religion, Catholic church.
Totally, yeah.
You know, things like that. So mode, and then possibly not great circumstances surrounding your baptism. How do we think about those things?
Okay, so
Those two things.
So mode, there's a lot to be said there, but very briefly,
Yeah.
we believe in full immersion baptism. So we put the whole person under the water.
Dunk 'em.
Dunk 'em.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, there's a few places for that, but the main reason is actually maybe from Romans 6, where it talks about how we're buried with Christ in baptism and raised again to walk in newness of life.
Defining the word there, basically, right?
Exactly, yeah. So that picture of baptism being really an identification with Christ, a physical identification with Him in His death and then in His resurrection again. In water, not in obviously anything else.
Right.
But that mode allows us to see. It allows us to see that imagery played out in real time.
Yep.
So that's why we immerse. Just very simple. There's lots more to be said about that. But lots of churches don't do that. And so there are lots of different types of baptism in churches that are good. Like for example, Presbyterians, our dear brothers who are Presbyterians. They baptize infants. They don't, and they don't immerse them. I don't think they sprinkle them. Yeah, exactly. And then there's lots of churches that are not good, and they also do baptism, but those baptisms are like the Catholic Church. Infant baptism, but not done in the same way. And so, what do we do with those things? Well, we believe that the Bible teaches us to baptize believers. I think that's very clear.
Right.
Make disciples, baptizing them. Not make disciples, baptizing them and all their kids.
Right.
Make disciples, baptizing them. And so
Not
because
infants.
of that, exactly, and so because of that, we have, we would say, if you have been baptized as a believer in a church that is not heretical, then you're safe. You're good to go.
Whatever church that is.
Whatever church that is.
Yeah.
And that brings up a whole bunch of questions. What if the guy who baptized you turns out to be a heretic?
Right.
What if the guy turns out to be a false teacher?
That
whatever.
happens.
And that does happen. And I would say that it's not an issue of the guy who does the baptizing.
Exactly.
It's an issue of where your heart was at that time. And so if you're baptized as a believer, true believer, you truly believe you were saved at that time. The guy who did it doesn't matter, so long as the church isn't a heretical church. However, for those who were baptized in the Catholic Church as infants, or baptized as infants, or maybe in different modes, sprinkled or different things in churches that weren't necessarily helpful, I would encourage those people to really consider in their heart that they weren't. That's not actual baptism. Infant baptism is not biblical baptism. It's giving a baby a bath, like sprinkling some water on a baby, which is not biblical baptism. And so I would say to a person who is a believer who was baptized as an infant, you've never been baptized. You were splattered with water as a child, but that's not baptism. So then I would encourage them, hey, you should probably get baptized as a believer. A person who was baptized in the Catholic Church, same deal. You were never baptized. That's a false religion, and you were not baptized actually. So you need to get baptized as a believer. So in all those ways, and even someone maybe who was baptized in a conservative or relatively conservative Protestant denomination, but was not immersed, their conscience can decide, but they might want to get baptized, and so. In all those categories, I think I think that's the goal. The goal is to make sure you were immersed as a believer, as a rational believer, adult.
No.
So that's baptism. And so you want to be baptized, and so in order to be baptized, you need to fulfill those things. Those
being a believer and being immersed in water. Those are the two main things in a church. That's teaching Christ.
That's Protestant.
Okay. So, what about sometimes people have fuzzy recollections of when they were saved and when they got baptized. What would you say to them to kind of ease their consciences, or how would you direct them?
So it's very hard to look back for a lot of people. You're raised in a Christian home.
Really hard.
Your salvation was sort of a ramp.
You're like
a day. It's not like you were addicted to crack and then you weren't anymore. There's a ramp of salvation. There's a time in there, and maybe you were baptized as a young person. Maybe you were baptized when you're 9 or something. Because of the tradition of your family there. But if that's the case, what I would say is, consider in your heart if you were a true believer or not. And ask the Lord to give you clarity on those things. And if in your heart you're like, well, I'm not 100% sure, then it's really an issue of your conscience.
Yeah, you wouldn't say you have to then.
I wouldn't say you have to. It's really an issue of the conscience. A person can choose to either be baptized again or not. And if they choose to not, that's okay, so long as they are believers at that time and their conscience is at peace with that past act.
Good.
If there's someone who maybe wasn't baptized or that was baptized who they're fuzzy on that, and I think the Lord would prompt their conscience for them to do that act of obedience.
Yeah, that's very helpful, because a lot of people do fall into that camp, right? You know, they get rebaptized, baptized 3 times, and that's not helpful too. Totally
unhelpful. Yeah, and that's another thing. Baptism doesn't like confer any spiritual blessing on you, right? So people that
it's not salvific for sure.
Yeah, no. And there's people actually, even right now in Orange County, there's people that are getting rebaptized for all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
and like to cast out certain things, all this stuff.
Right, for extra spiritual blessings, right?
Totally meaningless. That's a totally meaningless thing. Baptism is just identification with the person of Christ in the moment, in the reality of your salvation. Right. It's not...
And that's it.
And that's it. It doesn't confer any spiritual blessings.
That's very
And so those things are that's just an empty thing. And you're telling people to trust in an act instead of Christ.
Right.
And that's really a very dangerous thing.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope that's helpful for you, and we'll talk some more about some other baptism topics next time. Thanks.